So, it is the second day of April, and I welcome you to the Ochelli Effect here on UCY.tv, and I thank you for deciding to come to the website at ucy.tv/TOE. If not, if you are using your fondle slab of choice and deciding to utilize your application wherever it may be applicable, enjoy yourselves, tune in, whatever else you're using. Thank you very much. If you're catching it later on downstream on the YouTube, or if you're just picking it up and downloading it or sharing it with your friends, whatever it is you're doing, I'm so happy that you are tuning in to listen. It is all greatly appreciated. So, this second day of April again, one day after April Fool's Day. Good thing I wasn't broadcasting on April Fool's Day, huh? Well. This is a live program, by the way, which does broadcast on Tuesdays and Thursdays at 6 p.m. Eastern, and also on Saturdays at 8 p.m. Eastern for 2 hours apiece. No commercials, no BS, no censorship. This is what we do. Anyway, tonight, who do I have? Well, I have a returning guest. Frank Gregory Ford. That's right, the guy who talked to you about weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. No, not the BS narrative that we were fed, not the whole joke where we got to watch W look around and say, where are they? Might they be over here? Might they be over there? No, a gentleman who was actually a witness to a significant thing in history. He actually discovered these things over there. And, of course, we have on previous shows detailed that discovery. But not only that, no. The only intelligence operative, to my knowledge, from an American set of intel, military, whatever. The only military intelligence operative in American history, to my knowledge, to have been renditioned and survived, okay, from a hostile theater of operations. And hey, on top of it, tied directly to the Abu Ghraib's situation, tied directly to that entire command under, General Janis Karpinski. We have discussed his lawsuit. We have discussed a great many things on this show, including his impressions of the war on terror, as it were, and I know we're going to get into that tonight. I know we're going to get into that and a lot more. Now, tonight, a lot of times I have him on via the wonders of the cell phone, but we're going to see if we can add him on in Skype, and we may actually have a drop-in from somebody who is working on something with Dr. Ford as well. Now let's see if we can first get the man himself up on the Skype, because modern technology has got to cooperate with me. Otherwise, this doesn't happen. But anyway, I do refer you back to those other shows. You got to turn the speaker down just a little bit, because I can hear myself kicking back, and, they already hear enough of me. So we want to hear from you. How are you tonight, sir? Oh, now maybe you can't hear me at all.
Got you.
Hello?
Does the humble Dr. Ford hear me?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, Chuck. Okay.
Just checking. Okay.
Sorry, it was
Sorry.
a hit and miss. We had no indicator that you were on Skype, so here we are. Okay.
Okay. Great. I was giving this very long sort of descriptive talk up and was having just a little bit of trouble pulling you into the conversation, but we got you. You're there and you're
Oh,
solid.
yeah, no, I was just reading something really interesting about America's most, and this is a sign of the times, Chuck, America's most glamorous family. Do you know who they are?
Well, it depends on who you're talking to, so I'm wondering what publication you're reading.
Oh, okay, well, this was when you go through the grocery checkout line,
Oh, no.
and they have yeah. Well, America's most glamorous family are the Kardashians. What does that say about the state of America now, and the state of families in America? But the thing I found most interesting, and I might have misread this, Chuck, but there was something that said that Kim Kardashian had been busted for drugs, and the way I understand it is that she was coming back from one of those never-ending paparazzi sessions, overseas that she likes to go to, and the way I heard it is that she was coming back through customs, and they lifted her dress, at a normal customs check, lifted her dress and found 40 pounds of crack.
Wow.
I don't know if that's true or not, but I think somebody should check out that story. So.
Well, I'm almost surprised that you have not appeared, and do keep an eye on those supermarket tabloids, because at some point, you may find yourself in one because of the really explosive nature of a lot of the declarations that you've made. And of course, I'm not saying that they'll represent you well or anything like that, but if you do sit down for an interview with with them, you are due a check. I happen to know that because I knew a couple of different, former mobsters who actually got the check for sitting down with them. so just make sure you get a check if they ever approach you, okay?
Oh, well, I know the feeling. Yes. Yeah. No. I'll be right up there with the latest of Elvis sightings and the latest on who killed Kennedy. So.
Yeah, which is generally the recycled nonsense that they ran 10 years before anyway on the other anniversary.
Exactly. But, and Kim Kardashian, too. I mean, she's living proof that anyone in America can be famous. No talent, okay, no singing capability, no dancing capability. She can't act, to save her soul. But here she is, one of the most glamorous personalities and celebrities in America. So, hey, there's hope for me yet, Chuck. Okay, there's hope for both of us. So,
yeah, well, I don't know that I would take the Kardashian route, but I would certainly, again, take the paycheck.
Yeah, there's something to what you say, Chuck. I saw where Justin Bieber last year made $150 million. Justin Bieber, okay, and Kim Kardashian made about $40 million last year. Okay, something's really wrong here. All right, we must be missing something.
Yeah, well, it is a sad commentary on the American culture that this is what they occupy themselves with. I mean, I have done a couple of shows with the guy who essentially created the reality TV genre, because he did a show called Real People many years ago. He was the creator of that show.
Mm-hmm.
And that was kind of a fascinating thing. But you had these like short segments where they, went to fascinating individuals, in the country and just studied real people, as opposed to these celebrities and things like that. And
Mm-hmm.
I said to him on one of the shows, I think you opened Pandora's box, my friend, because now we have a whole culture of individuals, who are following these individuals who are famous for nothing more than simply being famous.
Mm-hmm.
And it's amazing. And meanwhile, the kind of stuff that we have discussed, should be headline news across the planet. You know, the idea that the guy who tried to report about the torture situation in Iraq, in the first incarnation of hostilities in Iraq recently, anyway. The guy who did that was renditioned by his own, military, was, extracted against his will and strapped to a stretcher. This kind of thing should be worldwide headline news everywhere. And yet, Kim Kardashian gets the ink. You know what I mean?
Not only does she get the golden egg, but she also gets the paycheck too. So I don't know how to change that, Chuck. I think you were referring to me, right? The guy who notified the House Committee on Intelligence and Collection that uncontrolled, unrestricted torture was going on of foreign nationals in several theaters of war, and it was going to lead to the greatest war crime scandal in U.S. history. And I, as a result of reporting that, was strapped to a stretcher, tortured on the stretcher, no less, and then abducted out of a country without any orders. I'm still technically in Iraq. For your listeners, I'm still in Iraq. If you were to check with the government right now, they'd say, "Oh no, he's in Iraq." All right, because there were no orders removing me from Iraq whatsoever. So, I have something really interesting for your listeners. I think they will like hearing about this. This was I was given my own copy of the House Senate Select Committee on Intelligence, the most recent investigation on the CIA's detention and torture program. Okay. Well, very interesting, given the fact that it was yours truly who contacted Senator Feinstein in 2003, 2004, contacted Nancy Pelosi in spite of her protestations to the otherwise, contacted John McCain and Barbara Boxer and said, "Look, people, you need to understand something here. We are about to enter the greatest set of war crimes in U.S. history because we've got a runaway intelligence service that is trying to make a profit, a business out of torturing and murdering people." All right?
Extremely sad commentary about McCain, too, especially, right? I mean, given his history, you would think that this guy would say, "Oh, wait a minute, this is something I ought to pay attention to." And meanwhile, what was the response you got when you tried to, inform Senator McCain about this?
I got a nice form letter that I'll have to send you a copy of sometime. It says, "Thank you very much for your concern, and we'll look into it, and everybody has to do their patriotic duty." Okay? Excuse me, how much am I paying in taxes this year to support these lambo senators and congressmen that tell me things like that? All right, that's the response I got. Senator Feinstein was a little bit more responsive, although her group acted like they didn't really want to hear it. Okay, it took me several communications. In fact, with David Granis, who heads up her committee in the Senate for intelligence and collection, I said, "Look, you people don't seem to understand something here. This thing is enormous, and it's getting bigger, and the whole world is reacting to it." Okay, the whole world is saying, "Hey, look, America has never tortured anybody. They don't have a history of torture. Now, what is this state-sponsored terror?" okay, all of a sudden being issued from the United States of America. It's what it's called, state-sponsored terror. Torture is designed to induce state-sponsored terror, okay, in its populations. And it did. It worked wonderfully in Iraq. It created the greatest insurgency this country has ever dealt with. It created the longest running ground war this country has ever dealt with. And surprise, it turned out that supposedly we were after Al Qaeda. It made Al Qaeda 3 times stronger. Today, presently, Al Qaeda is 3 times stronger and larger than it ever was when we first started. All right, let me give you number 1. Okay, there's 19 pages. There was 5,000 pages of the committee's report. Oddly enough, the CIA managed to get all but 19 pages redacted. But I'm surprised that they did not allow these to be redacted also. Redacted means basically classified and covered up, okay?
Well,
where
right.
the public never sees, all right?
Yeah, several times. I mean, I've gone through redacted documents, believe me, and it's a complete waste of time, because even if you can actually, get them from the official source, you're faced with, the classic looking blacked out, looks like somebody took a black magic marker and ran it across the whole thing, line by line. And, you have like the word "the" and then a bunch of black lines. So, yeah, you're talking about the summary report, which was finally issued. But, of course, there are 500 more pages that we have not seen yet. So, yeah.
Actually 5,000, Chuck.
Oh, I'm sorry, 5,000. I misspoke. You're right.
Okay.
Yes.
Hey, number one for your listeners. The CIA's use of enhanced interrogation techniques was not an effective means of acquiring intelligence or gaining cooperation from detainees. Gosh, imagine that. Okay. How cooperative would any of your listeners be with somebody that was lighting them on fire, was garroting them, was strangling them, was dislocating their arms? Okay, all the things I had to treat. Okay, as the medic for my group, I had to treat the victims of. All right.
Well, that's another point I want to make really quickly, is that, when people think about Abu Ghraib and they think about, the images that we were treated to in the general public, what we saw was guys with bags over their heads and really silly looking things, these stress positions and all this kind of nonsense. And you say to yourself, well, gee, that doesn't look so bad. But that wasn't the reality of what was going on there.
No, it wasn't. Actually, the public, and I want your listeners to remember this. The ACLU came to me. The ACLU came to me. The much maligned American Civil Liberties Union came to me and said, "Look, you're the only person that's had the courage to step forward and try to stop this. What can you tell us, about those pictures?" I said, "Oh, which pictures are we talking about?" And they said, "Oh, there's more pictures that we haven't seen." I said, "No, the American public only saw 5 photos. 5 photos that created the terror and fury. It was a global fury, okay, that those photos induced, all right? And it was myself who told the ACLU where to find those approximately 5,000 other photos, 5,000, okay, other photos, and approximately 4 hours of streaming video of the most horrendous torture you've ever seen, all right? And this included rape scenes, and this was all our own people doing it, okay, Americans doing it.
Right.
Not some evil, sinister torture chamber somewhere in some foreign country. No, it was our own people doing this to detainees, all right? I hate that word, detainees. It's prisoners, by the way.
Right.
So the ACLU immediately requested all those photos be released. And, of course, DOD went crazy. Department of Defense went nuts. And the strangest damn thing was, at the same time, the ACLU requested a release of my service records. my military records, all my intelligence files, and so classified files, what they call C files, those all disappeared. Amazing. They disappeared, and then I get the scandal that I believe one of your not the scandal but the slander that one of your callers called in last time and said, "Hey, can I explain this? The slanderous attack." Well, that was the retaliation on me for going and releasing this information about the agency and the torture, the hideous torture that was going on. Okay, so the ACLU managed to get a few hundred more photos and hours of streaming video. They played those for the House Committee on Intelligence, including Dianne Feinstein, and I saw them when they walked out of chambers after viewing what I had been dealing with, and trying to treat medically. Okay, they walked out and they were the color of white porcelain. Okay, they all looked like they were about ready to faint from what they'd seen our people doing to foreign nationals. Okay, in those photos and those hours of streaming video. I mean, you haven't lived till you've seen somebody, one of our people, one of our hometown sons, pouring phosphoric acid on the rectum of somebody screaming, okay, and laughing about it. All right, well, they did it. Okay, that's what was on the streaming video. So
right, and the other thing is, of course, just for clarification here. So when people go to search Frank Gregory Ford on the internet, and you find all of these interesting sort of discreditations being handed out on the internet through things like Veriseal, okay, this is the kind of garbage that was basically done to you in retaliation after you had blown a whistle yet again.
Absolutely right.
Yeah.
And if you want to see the origin of those attacks, just the name Larry Johnson. Larry Johnson is who represents the State Department and the CIA. Okay, that's not the Cocaine Importation Agency. That's not the Culinary Institute of America. No, that is the Central Intelligence Agency, and that is who was funding the entire slander campaign against me. I've been living with this thing for almost 10 years now, and it's amazing how people call me and say, "Well, how can they say that about you?" Geez, yeah, I'm the guy who filed the charges. Yeah, but they wouldn't say something like that if it wasn't true. That's libel and slander if it's not true. I said, well, who do you think you're dealing with here? You're dealing with a bureaucratic agency that doesn't think twice about running cocaine into the United States, doesn't think twice about running guns all over the world and weapons all over the world, and selling weapons to the Saddam Hussein regime, weapons of mass destruction. Do you think you think they like the idea that their copper green program is being endangered by somebody who obeys the laws like I do? Okay, copper green is the program all over the world that operates black sites. Okay, and these are U.S. operated black sites using the logistics of the Carlyle Group. Imagine the Carlyle Group, who was started by George H.W. Bush. Okay, the Carlyle Group provides logistics and support for these black ops sites that are all over the world now, and they're having all kinds of problems all over the world now, which specialize in taking prisoners, torturing them, and murdering them, okay? For a fee, of course. That's the American way in all of this,
well,
for a fee.
You have to make a profit, after all. And, of course, if you want to ask somebody directly about, what happens when you kick over the wrong rock related to the CIA, I mean, all we have to do is look to the late Gary Webb. And guess what? This is what happens. Want to let you know that your biographer, I believe, has joined us here. So, can you hear me?
I can.
Excellent.
Can you hear me all right?
I'm hearing you just fine.
Okay, I live out in the sticks, so I never know whether the signal is strong.
Well, first, I wonder if you could just sort of introduce yourself to my listeners and kind of give them an idea what it is that sort of inspired your desire to put in the work, because I know it's a lot of work to begin to verify, to begin to track down, and to come up with a coherent way to illustrate this very complex story. That ends up evolving in the universe, that Dr. Ford occupies, because it is tied to so many extremely relevant things that are still ongoing to this day. And I'm wondering what it is that actually motivated you to get involved.
You've just explained it, Chuck. Gary Ford's experiences, and time rushes by faster than he keeps track of. It's been a dozen years since he was in all that soup. I met Greg, it'll be 2 years now in June. A mutual friend put us together.
You may want to kill your radio sound, because I think I'm hearing a kickback, or it's your speaker.
No, it's not mine, Chuck, because my radio is not on. And I can hear that too, and I don't know where it's coming from.
Oh, okay.
But it ain't mine.
No problem. Sorry about that. I was just trying to make sure you were clear. And also, give everybody your name too, if that's okay.
My name. My name is Mitch Clogg. Mitch rhymes with itch, and clog as in plumbing, only it has 2 G's on the end. Mitch Clogg. And if you were to Google me, you would find the identification that I prefer is public interest journalist. That's what I am. I've done many jobs, private sector, public sector, but through them all, ever since I was a boy, I've been a journalist, either full-time or on my own time. I hope everybody else can hear. So anyhow, that's who I am, and I got to know Greg 2 years ago, and what drew me to his story was what you've just said, that it touches on practically everything. How the government works, how the military works, how our international relations are, human nature. Greg is both an educated man and an enthusiastically self-taught man, and his interests go everywhere, and so do mine. So it was kind of a natural fit. It's when we are together, it takes elaborate civility and politeness not to trample on each other, because we've both got so much to say that we've seen and heard and learned about stuff. And it's important now that if I get nothing else across in this space of time while I'm talking with you and Chuck, it's that I've got documentation for the things that he says. And the documentation is extensive enough that if it were all piled on my chest, I would suffocate within a couple of minutes, I think. And I can tell you this, that the extraordinary things that he says tempt a person to say, it says right here on my computer that he never really was a Navy SEAL, that he's just full of it, and he's an imposter and a fraud and a phony. Well, sorry, he was. And all the other things that he says he was. And the things that happened to him, I have in official military reports and CIA reports and FBI reports and U.S. Congress, U.S. Senate reports. And I have never, I'm a reporter, which means that I'm professionally skeptical, I'm professionally dubious, and as much as I've come to love and trust Chuck, I still check him out all the time. And I have not found one single discrepancy between anything he's told me and the verifiable truth. And nowadays, given the computer and the rest of the stuff that we have, so much is verifiable. So, I jotted things down listening to you and Chuck talk, and I could go on, but I'm not going to. Now I'm going to shut up and respond to whatever you want me to.
Well, you know what? That was one of my initial responses, because people approached me after the first show I did with Dr. Fortier, and what I got was, did you verify this stuff? Are you serious? And I had gone through as best I could. I didn't do, the extensive job that I bet you did, but I went through and I tried to find a way to trip up his story. I got to be honest with you. And I checked with some very interesting peripheral people that I do check these kind of things with, and got the most fascinating responses. What I discovered was the only people that were willing to deny the kind of stuff he was talking about and to like put him in a bad light were generally those whose loyalties always seemed to lie with the operation of making sure that the truth does not surface. Okay. That was the first thing I discovered. The next thing I discovered was that they were throwing all kinds of inaccuracies at me that made no sense. I mean, at one point when I was having a discussion before we did show number one, I told him I was laughing because somebody tried to explain to me some scenario with a Marine Corps doctor, and I can't remember the full scenario. And I said, my problem, of course, is the Marine Corps doesn't have doctors. The Navy does. So,
okay.
Things like that started to happen, and I said, I've definitely latched on to something here that is, truth that not everyone wants to be told.
Right.
So, and that's the kind of thing that they try to do to those of us that they think are, foolish civilians, okay?
Well, they certainly were effective with it when John Kerry wanted to be the president, weren't they? With the Swift boat stuff,
right?
And people mostly bought it. And I'll never understand why Kerry didn't put up a really robust defense, but that's another story. But people, I mean, that kind of character assassination is very, very effective. But if even if you say it in a small voice, but you keep saying it over and over, the truth is really mighty potent, isn't it? And it comes out. Eventually, it comes out.
No, absolutely, and that's why I've had him on several times, and we have absolutely hammered on certain subjects. And I'll tell you the most shocking sort of revelations that we covered with him. And I'm wondering, I want to hear about your skepticism to start with, because you had to have been a little skeptical, because even I was when I heard him say that, and I heard him on another radio show say it actually, that no, that whole weapons of mass destruction story was not only wrong, because we all knew that was a joke. I mean, it was a joke for years in the alternative media that, of course, we knew there were weapons of mass destruction there because we still had the receipts. Okay.
Yeah, right. That's not a joke. That's the literal truth, and that's what Greg found in that bunker.
That's the thing. That's what struck me is, wait a minute. A lot of truth is told in humor sometimes, and of course I didn't have any sort of corroboration for that idea, but I really believed that for the longest time. That there was no way that that this scenario played out where we needed to invade Iraq based on this whole idea that they had these weapons and we needed to stop them and everything else. And I said to myself, well, the best place to get them would have been from us anyway. It's absolutely ridiculous that, and us, when I say us, of course, I mean U.S. assets of sorts, not me, not you and me personally, but you know what I'm saying. So that's what the bottom line is. And over again, we see this kind of, it's a con job. It's a setup. And this is what he discovered himself, and also
it was an uncomfortable truth to me. Because I believed that the Bush administration had lied wholesale to us, and they got Colin Powell to lie wholesale to Congress, or rather to the United Nations, in order to justify our attack on Iraq. So it's not comfortable to find out that, well, indeed, they did have WMD. Now, what happens to be true is they were frantically trying to get rid of them. They were frantically trying to comply with with the UN orders and the United States demands. They were frantically trying to get rid of their WMD, and they nearly succeeded, but not completely. And I have questioned Greg so closely on this that I feel as though I was in that bunker when the Iraqi colonel took him down there. I can see it, I can smell it, I can feel it, I can touch it, and it's spooky. As a matter of fact, all that Greg's story has exposed is spooky to the point that being closely associated with it is being closely associated with nightmares, because it is nightmarish. That was nightmarish. We did indeed have WMD, and they did quite literally have our bills of lading still attached to them, and the poisonous substance in them, which is the most poisonous toxic weapon that has been devised so far. And that was made here in the United States. Where was it, Greg? Was it Indiana? Was it a small town there that the town's main function was making this stuff called VX gas, which is something that, it's so monstrous that you don't even want to talk about it. But it was made here. Those weapons were rebuilt for use, largely for Saddam to use against Iran. But they were still there. They were still in their crates. That's all true, and it doesn't fit with the preferred scenario that the Bush administration lied to. Well, he did lie to us. They didn't know that there was still some there, and they would have done anything to hide them, but they didn't succeed. And Greg, being the kind of intelligence guy that he was, he found them. His first few days in Iraq, every single one would have been 60-point headlines, except that the information was suppressed over and over and over. And my job and yours, Chuck, and Greg's, is to just keep pushing it until it's not suppressed anymore.
Exactly. So, Dr. Ford, you're hearing people talk about you.
Yes. Right.
Please
there's a couple.
Add in.
I was going to say there's a couple of things I need to put out here, okay, that keep getting overlooked. Remember, the government operates on one word. It's called semantics. All right. It took me 30 years of being in government service, okay, in the intelligence business to realize the extent of semantics. Okay, semantics allow the government to become the government, to be the government, to allow bureaucracies to grow larger and demand increasing budgets every year. All right. Government bureaucracies don't view themselves as being accountable to the American people, the people that support them. Oh, no, that's not how they think. They never have, and they never will think in those terms. So when I hear terms like the Iraqi weapons of mass destruction program, okay, now what that means is to a normal person, that means that Iraq must have been producing their own weapons of mass destruction. Well, what I found out when I was there in Iraq was no, they were not producing their own weapons of mass destruction. Why? Because they were buying them directly from the United States of America. Which means
Saddam Hussein was characterized by the American Department of State as and this is a quote, the most progressive leader in the Middle East. And when our ambassador to Iraq, one April Glaspie, met with Saddam Hussein before the Ninth Gulf War, she said to him with regard to his dispute with Kuwait, she said, and this is famous too, I know you both remember it, and your well-informed listeners will remember this too. She said to Saddam Hussein, the United States has no interest in Arab disputes. In other words, do what you feel you must with regard to Kuwait. It was a setup. He went into Kuwait. We attacked him. We killed people everywhere. And the rest of the story goes. And then 12 years later, we came back and did it all again to a country that at that time was sick and wounded almost unto death. So the country that we attacked and occupied in 2003 was a country that was prostrate. And all that is. I'm not telling anything. It's just what I'm saying are things that people ought to remember and realize. They already know it. They've already heard it. But it just has to be said over and over and over. And Greg's experiences in Iraq, they go to all. I differ with Greg. He says the federal government runs on semantics. All governments in all time run to a large extent on mendacity, on falsehood. Mm. And when it serves their interest to tell the truth, they do. And they pat themselves on the back very publicly. And when it serves their interest to lie, they do. And they always have, and they probably always will. Transparency, that's a dream. And the more we try to realize it, that's good. But it's a dream. Also, I don't quite agree that the bureaucracies of the United States are all intent on deceiving everybody and growing. It's not so much the bureaucracy. The bureaucracy, I've been a bureaucrat. Even while I've been a journalist, I've been a bureaucrat in this country, both at state level and federal level. And the bureaucracies are run by and large, or manned and womaned by honest, well-meaning, sometimes very hard-working people. But it's the people who are appointed to be their bosses. Who happens to be the Secretary of State is free to ignore what his or her department has been doing at great cost and with great diligence forever, and tell whatever lies or propaganda or half-truths suit the administration of the United States government at the moment. It's not the people who are down there in cubbyholes doing the work. By and large, those are people of goodwill and good conscience, and right. They deserve their pay. They deserve their positions. It's their bosses who come and go with the elected administrations. Those are the ones who might be good, or they might be awful. You got to squint at them, listen to them. American people like it quick and easy. And one thing that they have to learn, and one thing that you know and Chuck knows and your fondest listeners know, is you can't have it quick and easy. This is not a simple world anymore. It's not just me and the mammoth. It's a very, very complex world, and I don't care if you're a genius or if you're a simpleton, you've got to use all the brain power you have to grapple with it, to stay alert. And, that's the business I'm in, and that's the business you two guys are in.
Well, I'll tell you something. I got to concur with you about the whole, people that are positioned in the lower realms of the, bureaucracies. Even when I was investigating stuff having to do with the Kennedy assassination, and people would come out years later, and say things that they never said on the official record, that they never said while they were still, career men in the military or whatever. A lot of times I would say to them, why didn't you come forward with this information earlier? Because that is a question always asked, and usually if you can build a decent rapport with them, what they would say almost to a man is, in one way or another, look, I had to go along to get along, because if you fought against it, if you went against the grain when it came to what was happening, during situations like this, bad things would happen to you. And, of course, Greg is absolute living proof of that. So, because what did he do? Well, he tried to report to his superiors, that, look, bad things are going on here, fellas. We're going to have a big problem. And this is wrong. Okay? And what happened to him? Well, his repayment for doing his job, in my estimation, was to, again, as we, not to harp on it, but the fact is, the only American intelligence operative I've ever heard of to be renditioned by his own people and, forcibly taken on a stretcher and extracted from a theater. I mean, yeah.
If he had not made himself public by writing to American government officials, to military officials, if he had not done that, they would have killed him, Chuck. I'm convinced of that. I'm totally convinced of that. That we wouldn't have any Greg Ford to talk with now, because he would not be among us. As it was, he was letting people know what he was seeing early on, and if they had murdered him, if they had fragged him or whatever, friendly fired him, then they would have been at risk of being caught, found out, and tried for murder. Otherwise, they would surely have killed him, and that's why Craig is still breathing and still with us. And good on him, and congratulations to us, because you've got his story to tell, and it's a story that the length and breadth of it is very considerable.
I mean, even what's going on today. I mean, you can connect Dr. Ford directly to
absolutely right.
The head of ISIS.
Yep.
The alleged head of ISIS. Excuse me, but who they tell us is the big leader of the ISIS construct.
Greg tells a great story about that. Is kind of fascinating. He met him, and Greg will correct me if I get something wrong, but he met him in Samarra. And for this man to rename himself al-Baghdadi is his effort to generalize himself as a man of the whole country instead of a man of a single city. Right. He wants to be the entire Arab world's leader. But when Greg first met him, and I will take a little bit of your time because this is such a rich story. When Greg first met him, he had not been any particular time in custody, and he had a couple of guys with him who were sort of scared of their situation, being in the hands of the American military intelligence. But this guy was not. His name was not Ben al-Baghdadi. Greg can tell us what it was. He was a punk from the streets. He was a petty criminal. He'd been in trouble with the cops here and there. And he was a punk, but he was a punk with a certain amount of swagger. And at one point he said to Greg about Jessica Lynch. He said, "Oh yeah, we've got your blonde lady soldier." And he said in this leering, revolting, unmistakable tone, he said, "And we're treating her very well." The lasciviousness of that remark and the intention of that guy got to Greg, and he said that he almost lost it at that point, that he wanted to physically strike this guy and managed to check himself, but he made, he locked eyes with the man who is now the head of the so-called Third Caliphate. He locked eyes with this guy, and he said, "Whatever you do to her, we're going to do to you." And I've said, "Craig, that's a promise, and you still got to keep that one." And I'm looking forward to the moment when that can happen. But just to finish up the story, Greg said that only once in his life before that had he felt himself swell up with the impulse to do physical harm to somebody, almost an irresistible impulse, and that was when he was working as a prison official, and he found him outside the cell of a man named Ng, who was one of the most gothic mass murderers in American history. He was a sadist who just got off on the intense suffering of anybody, and when Greg realized that this person dancing around, acting all weird on the other side of the bars, to whom he was delivering something from the the shop in the prison, he realized who that was, and he said he at that time was visited with an impulse to crush that person like you would crush a disgusting bug. He had that same impulse with the man now called al-Baghdadi, the third caliph of Islam. So there's, I've taken up your time to tell that story, but it's such let Greg tell it. It's better from him who did it.
Right.
Well, only an investigative journalist could put something so poignantly, Mitch. Thank you.
Well, good. I'm glad. I'm glad it sounded all right.
That whole issue with Baghdadi is blowing up in the world right now. I mean, it is taken. It is that whole group, as I said, Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi was working with another fellow named Colonel Mahmoud, who they headed up one of the most ferocious intelligence units in the Middle East, and it was called the Mukhabarat. And that's what his real value was, and that's why it's so important when you're an intelligence operative to never ever lose control. All right, because the real issue with Baghdadi was that he had access to the greatest database that we needed to find out what was going on in the Middle East and who was who. It had been collected for approximately 40 years under the regime of Hussein. That's what I needed to control. That's what I needed to find out about. And so in this little twerp looks at me and sneers that he is going to show this female soldier, Jessica Lynch, a really good time, and they were going to take really good care of her. Okay, yeah, I came very close to snapping, and because there was an imperative, everyone was looking for Jessica Lynch. Every single American soldier was looking for Jessica Lynch because everybody knew what was happening and would probably happen to her. So that's why there was such almost a panic imperative that we find her. And when he said he had her, that was fine. And then when he sneered that, okay, that was fine too, because as I said, and Mitch just said, that the two Shia policemen already stated that they would beat the truth out of him, okay, for me. But I told him, I said, no, he was going to get the same treatment. Baghdadi was going to get the same treatment that Jessica Lynch got. And that was much more terrifying, to a man of his stature, and race, and position, okay, to be treated like that. And
right.
So that's why he gave us
a beating he was prepared for. Okay.
Oh yeah.
It was the punk who blinked, not Greg. That's in that stare down. It was the punk who blinked, and in a world now justly terrified by what the ISIS and al-Baghdadi and his crew are doing, it's important for them to know that this man is not the boogeyman. He's a disgusting piece of humanity, but he's not the boogeyman. He will go down, and so will his cause, and people are being hurt terribly in the meantime. But this is just a guy. He's not an admirable guy. Anyway, so that's the importance of that story in my mind.
Well, okay, so Chuck, there were a few things you wanted to talk about today. All right, like the USS Ronald Reagan.
Well, yeah, absolutely. I wanted to get to that as well. While we're involved in all this, I mean, I went over a couple of headlines with you really quickly off the air, and this is why I say this stuff exactly ties to what's going on today. Of course, I'm sure you've seen the news about what happened in Yemen in the past week. I'm sure you've seen the whole thing about how the Iranian Shiites on the ground. Tell me something, Greg, because you were there, all right?
Hey, why don't I step out, Chuck, and leave it to you guys to solve all this stuff?
Well, sure. I mean, unless there's something else that you want to, make
No,
sure to add in.
listen, I would, everything you talk about is of interest to me, and I got stuff to say, but this is your show and it's Greg's show, and if I bow out right now, it'll leave freer air for you two to discuss things.
Thank you, Mitch.
Thank you, sir, and thank you, Chuck. It's been a pleasure.
Oh, listen, anytime, sir, and everybody. Mitch Clog, okay? And like he said, Mitch rhymes with itch and clog with an extra G on it, just like as if your drain was clogged.
Right.
Mitch Clog. So look him up and look for the book about Frank Gregory Ford coming out. When is it coming anyway? Do we know yet, Mitch?
When is Paradise returning to the earth? Next year, Chuck. It's going to come out next year.
Next year.
Exactly when, that's in the hands of the publishing industry. You never know what they're going to do.
Oh, I know how that goes, but I just wanted to give you a chance to say, if you had a target date in mind. And when you do, please let me know, okay?
Indeed, I will. And thank you, sir. It's been a pleasure meeting you.
Oh, absolutely. You as well, sir.
Bye.
Take care. So that was pretty interesting, right?
Well, as I've always said about Mitch, with a last name like Clog, he has to be a hell of a dancer, and he is. So yeah, no, this is a fascinating story about the Ronald Reagan and how do you say it in Japanese, and the Fukushima reactor in Japan? Is that what that is?
It might as well be the TEPCO asset, Fukushima, of course, which, more than 3 years later is still seeming to explode and continue to contaminate the ocean. Wondrous thing. Of course, the USS Ronald Reagan was, just for anybody who doesn't know, was a U.S. ship that attempted to go and help because, after the whole tsunami and all that, I mean, there were a lot of things going on, and what did they do? They wound up being contaminated, not being able to go into other ports, all this stuff, and I've tried to reach out to some of the individuals who are trying to get this story out, and I've been unsuccessful so far, but definitely a story that needs to be told as well.
Now, is that how you say it, Chuck? Fukushima?
Fukushima, yeah.
Oh,
but
okay, all
I
right.
kind of like the way you said it better.
Okay, yeah, no, my kanji is a little rusty. I actually lived in Japan for a while, so no, I'm sure this is some sort of payback, since Japan is the only country to ever suffer a nuclear attack. This is some sort of payback on us. I'm sitting about 40 yards from the Pacific Ocean, and I had the strangest feeling, for about maybe two weeks now, that when I turn out my lights at night, the ocean's glowing. Okay, that might be my imagination, but we've started seeing starfish dissolve. They're actually dissolving and dying here, and the fish population has completely changed. Since Fukushima, since the the nuclear tide has arrived. Mm-hmm. All right, so things have changed completely here, and the irony is our media is not covering it. They're not warning anybody that this is going on. And it is a real danger, as the crewmen from the USS Ronald Reagan can testify. All right, what is it? 274 crewmen now have come down with some terrible conditions, medical conditions. Okay, exotic blood diseases, exotic cancer types, all the things that you get from being around, what's the word? Unnatural materials like radiation. All right, myself, I'm arguing with our government right now about the burn pit syndrome, the burn pit in Iraq and Afghanistan that have caused so many unusual and exotic cancers. We're getting 20-year-olds coming back from Iraq and Afghanistan with 3 and 4 and 5 different kinds of cancers. All right,
I wonder if you
And
could
it's
explain
all
really briefly what you mean by the burn pit syndrome. Like, why are you calling it that? And because
sure.
I know why, but I just want to illustrate that for the listener.
Right. Well, now the burn pit. Anybody that's listening that knows someone who went to Iraq, okay, they know somebody who was exposed to the burn pit toxins. Now, every base, every military, every post, they what they do is they have a pit where they burn their trash. Okay. Well, we're not talking an OSHA approved burn site here. We're talking about, like in my case, okay, at Balad Air Base, where weapons of mass destruction were discovered, as in sarin gas, okay, sarin oil, all right, were found on Russian chemical suits, and it was such an embarrassing issue that we had the engineers, our command, the same command that our defendants in my court case, by the way,
Mm-hmm.
they ordered the engineers to dig a huge pit and throw the Russian chemical, rubber chemical suits into the pit, and then doused them with the suits were actually dripping with the oil, the sarin oil that turns to gas. Well, it looks like nicotine, looks like brown oil, like from car sludge. And our command ordered the enlisted to soak those suits in diesel and gasoline and then light them on fire. Okay. I said to the command, do not do this. This is an unbelievably stupid thing to do. Okay. And they said, we don't care what you think, Dr. Ford. We don't give a shit what you think. All right. You burn those suits right now. And so, needless to say, when I actually took the responsibility of tossing the flare into the pit to light these suits on fire, and I looked around, and of course, the command who had ordered me to do this, they were long gone. They just took off. And so, anyway, I lit the suits on fire, and I watched the smoke, and it rose up, and it went directly right back on to Camp Anaconda. Okay, that was the biggest facility in Iraq for American forces, Camp Anaconda. And they liked it so much, the command liked it so much, that they decided that they were going to burn in those pits, in that pit, they were going to burn severed limbs from IED explosions, medical waste, raw sewage, jet fuels, and so forth. Tar, oils, you name it, they burned it. Okay, so you can imagine.
So
Every morning,
realistically, even beyond the sarin tainted suits, you got God knows what being lit up into the air, and therefore ending up in the lungs of anybody who happened to be there. But most noticeably to you, of course, you know, yourself,
yeah.
and of course the enlisted guys, and of course the guys who ordered it to be done are not going to stand there while you do it.
Well, yes. Well, the President Obama has signed in now. It is just coming into the VA system, but it is available. Anybody that was in Iraq was probably exposed to the burn pit, syndrome. All right, and I highly recommend everyone that can hear this interview that if you know anybody who was in Iraq, they need to report to the VA that they were in the vicinity of a burn pit. All right, they need to be checked. Everyone needs to be checked. Okay, for several malignancies and several malignant producing compounds. All right, they need to be checked. That's how critical this is. And so, who has given me a harder time about all this than about this information, other than the command who wanted to start this insanity? It's the U.S. government and the VA. They have steadfastly stood in my way of reporting this information. But now it is in existence, and yes, I recommend anyone who was in Iraq to go to their VA clinic and be screened for burn pit syndrome.
Mm. No, absolutely. And this is, it's another one of these cases, too, where, like the whole Gulf War syndrome that we had, post Desert Storm, people for many years talked about that being, nothing. It was psychosomatic, et cetera. And that's the way it was dismissed for the longest time. Of course, I personally feel as though they kind of drag these things out. And of course, this is just me. I think they drag these things out in some cases just to see how many of you guys will die off before they have to deal with it. I really do.
You're absolutely correct. That's what I'm talking about with bureaucracies, Chuck. How they behave and how they treat, like the fighting man. And you're constantly seeing issues right now with our VA treating people exactly like that.
Right.
So when I hear that there was 274 sailors that were turned away from the VA because they were exposed to radiation at Fukushima, that is exactly the same thing that I have been dealing with. All right, and that needs to be brought out. The VA needs to be, held accountable. By the way, that cough that you just heard. Mm-hmm. That is a cough that I received from one of the burn pits, all right, from exposure to the burn pit. I've had a cough ever since I left Iraq, all right, the same one.
I was just going to ask you about that, actually, if you didn't mind explaining that, what was your lung health, what was your lung capacity like before you went to Iraq, and what was it like afterwards? After being exposed to all this stuff. I was wondering if you wouldn't mind kind of elaborating on that, because there's an illustration right there. And I know that sometimes you have a little shortness of breath and things when I speak with you, and this isn't because you've gotten some flu or some cold. That happens to me when I get sick on the occasion that I do. But for you, this has become a constant now for, going on 12 years, right?
Well, let me see. This time last year, I was in a intensive care unit. All right, hooked up to several tubes, being monitored every 5 seconds, because my heart had gone into a fibrillation. All right, and it was directly connected to this burn pit syndrome. All right, I started feeling bad. 2 days later, my better half said, "I'm taking you to the VA. They're gonna treat you. You're in desperate straits." And I'm your typical veteran. Okay. Oh, I can live with it. I can deal with it. Oh, yeah, I'll get over it. And even the fact that I'm a doctor, I saw all the symptoms of what was happening to me, and I still denied it. Okay, and when I walked into the doors of the VA hospital in Sacramento, they said that I had about an hour to live. From what they could tell on the monitors, 1 more hour, and that would have been it for me. I wouldn't be here talking to your listeners. So that was a year ago. Okay, that I was in the intensive care unit. When I went to get evaluated for the burn pit syndrome, the doctor who was monitoring me, he said, let me just listen to your heart. Something's not right here. And he actually listened to my heart and discontinued the interview and had me transported to the emergency room. All right. That was only a few months ago. Okay. To show you the problems that I'm having, me personally, from the burn pit syndrome. Okay. There it is right there. It doesn't get any more poignant than that. All right. That's why I say, if anybody knows veterans, don't let them sit there and say, oh, yeah, I can live with this. Oh, yeah, it's not that bad. No, it is that bad, because there's things in your bodies that have been introduced in time of war in these situations that you can't even comprehend, and that will kill you. And if you think the VA or anybody else is going to be concerned about it, you're wrong, all right? They only are concerned about things that they're made to be concerned about, okay? So that's why I'm saying for the veterans, and this goes for Agent Orange, and this goes for the radiation victims on the USS Ronald Reagan. No, having them tell you, no, you don't have anything wrong, that's not good enough. All right, get in and you tell them and you insist, all right, that you were exposed to these extremely toxic elements and you need treatment. Absolutely.
How was your health before you went to Iraq, though?
Well, it was good enough to get me into Iraq. How's that?
That's one way to look at it. But I just wanted to kind of draw a picture for people that, that this started then. It wasn't like, you were smoking 5 packs a day and therefore,
No.
you've got these problems, so on
No,
and so forth.
I don't smoke. I don't drink, Chuck. Okay, and I was healthy. I was in, fighting form, as they call it, fighting fit. All right, and I was able to do all the programs, the PFT programs and so forth that got me into great shape. And of course, after 30 years of doing this stuff, I was beginning to say, gee, do I really need to do this again? I was getting to that point in my thinking. But that was the only thing that wasn't ready to go, was my thinking. All right. I went in the military and I went to start doing government service in 1973 in fact, it was during the 73 war with Israel, Israel and Egypt. And my first job was presidential security for President Nixon. Okay. That was my first job. And I have people now, I say President Nixon, and they say, oh, yeah, I read about him in the history books. Okay. So obviously I've been around. Okay. And to have this happen on my last assignment when I was scheduled to be retired. Okay. I had my retirement letter in, and to be treated like I was, especially on the torture issue, that was more than most people can even imagine. By the way, Chuck, I don't know if I've ever mentioned this to you, but here something that's going to come when my case goes to court on that issue is, very few people know this, but my cousin, was in the command with me. Okay, he was a warrant officer in interrogation. Okay, in the command. All right. In Iraq. That is something that very few people know about, but I'm putting it out on the air, okay? And he will be a witness in the case. And he was the one who warned me initially what the command was going to do, okay? This case is history making, okay? There's no question about it. And so it's about time now that people, when people say, oh, well, yeah, he didn't know what he was talking about. Oh, he's just making this stuff up. As I saw on the Veriseal, site, oh, I'm making my own military records up. Okay, that's what they said. I'm fabricating my own military records. Surprise, that, the top intelligence chief that was in Iraq in the command was my cousin who saw the whole thing, okay, and warned me what was going on, okay, and how they were doing it, okay, and why they were doing what they were going to be doing, like renditioning me, okay. So sorry, to all those doubting Thomases, and there's plenty of them out there. Afraid not had a family member that was in Iraq with me who warned me that they were going to do exactly what they did. So, so that on top of all the other documentation in my case, okay, is giving the government fits right now, as one might imagine. So, anyway.
And you've since recovered your service record also, even though they at first denied that it even existed, right?
Well, that's what they based the attacks on, on the Veriseal thing. Oh, ha ha, laugh, laugh. This guy says he's this, says he's that. Ha ha, laugh, laugh. See, there's no service record. It just disappeared. As the head archivist in St. Louis told me, she said, sir, there's a problem with your record. And I said, what's that? She said, there is no record. According to what we see here, this was about 4 months after I returned, by the way, from Iraq. She said, there is not one single document in my file. I was never in the military. I was never in the government, as far as she could tell. And this is the ultimate authority, St. Louis, okay? Now, yes, I have recovered all of my documents, all of my military service, all of my special forces documentation, all my military intelligence documentation. Everything has been recovered. All right. And it has given, of course, as you might imagine, it has given the government fits to know that they are an open book also. So anyway, that is part of the 700 pounds that of documentation, approximately, what is it, 8,000 documents that Mr. Clogg has access to in writing my book. He probably couldn't do it without those documents. So yes, that is the situation.
Right, and the very first conversation I had with you, we discussed your military records because I was quite familiar with the idea that these things are made to disappear. How do I know that? Well, I told you, and I've said on the air, I think one other time, but I'll say it again. My father's military records disappeared too. So this is not something that just happened to you, but seems to be part of the MO over there. Whenever they've got something inconvenient that they want to hide, this is one of the ways that they deal with it, is to disappear documentation. And I'm really curious to hear how you actually recovered that stuff, but I don't know if you want to go into that on here.
No, I'd like to go into the situation with Bo Bergdahl, and then I'd like to go into Jeb Bush, talk about these two personalities.
You know what?
So,
certainly, because of course
yes.
the Bo Bergdahl thing is still occupying a lot of people's minds because what is it in the past week also? We were treated with the idea that he would actually now be charged and all this other kind of stuff. They've gotten that far. The story is really slippery, though, in my estimation, because I don't know, just something doesn't make sense here to me. But I'd love to hear what you have to say about it. And we haven't actually discussed this, you and I, so this will be the first time I'm hearing it.
Right, absolutely. No, I saw very interesting film footage taken about 3 days before, quote, Bo Bergdahl defected. All right. I didn't see anything, and it was done, it was, what is it, The Guardian, the British investigative journal, The Guardian, and they interviewed the observation post that Bo Bergdahl just happened to be in. It just happened, okay, just a few days before, okay, and now the story goes is that he claims that he was forcibly taken, okay, from the observation post, the OP, and then of course his fellow travelers that were with him, his fellow soldiers, they said that, oh no, he just walked away. Well, looking at that film footage, and you can go online and get this footage, okay, there didn't appear to be any sort of tension or trauma in the unit, anything like that. And Bo Bergdahl looked to be pretty stable. He didn't look like somebody who was having some personal issues or anything like that. He was well dressed, clean, he's smoking a pipe. I mean, not that these are all required to, be a defector, but he looked like he was quite content with his lot there at that observation post. And no one at the observation post said anything untoward about him. They didn't say that there was any tension going on other than the fact that everybody was questioning why were they there. Now, there was a fellow, Robert Garwood, he was in Vietnam, okay, and supposedly he defected to the North Vietnam, and he was a Marine or had been a Marine, and just one day he just disappeared. And this sounds pretty comparable to the Garwood story. Now, the way I understand it is that the same thing happened. He was just taken prisoner, okay, and then he showed up. Garwood showed up, and then nobody liked the idea of him showing up after the war was over. And then they tried to court-martial him like they're trying to do to Bo Bergdahl, trying to court-martial him. So, and of course, Garwood was found innocent, because there is a big gap of investigation that simply could not take place. And I strongly suspect that there's something that is comparable to the Pat Tillman case. Okay, the famous NFL football player that got shot in the head 3 times from less than 6 feet away by an M16. Okay, right. A 223 round. Okay, I suspect that there's something comparable to that case and in my case. All right, because I look at my case, and I've gone back to several people that were in my unit, and I say, hey, you knew what was going on. Why didn't you support me? Why didn't you come forward? And virtually all of them had said, the first thing the command did was said, hey, this makes us look bad. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to burn this guy. And if you don't like it, we're going to burn you too. Okay? That's what I smell all over this case. Okay? With Bo Bergdahl, and I smelled it with Pat Tillman. Okay? All the controversy with Pat Tillman and Gary Garwood. The same thing. In war, things happen unexpectedly, as I certainly well know. And this smells like a command cover-up. And if you don't think so, okay, look at the conviction rate of court-martials. If the military decides to court-martial you, it doesn't even matter if you weren't even on the same planet. You're getting convicted. Okay, they do have a defense, yes. Okay, it's called a JAG, Judge Advocate General's defense.
Right.
Okay, and the thing is that there may be successful in maybe 2%, and it's usually the scenario that I just described. Okay, is that the person wasn't even on the same continent at the time when something that he was accused of doing happened. Okay, but that's what I strongly suspect in the Bo Bergdahl case, is that he knows something, he's been made aware of it. Okay, and they want to shut him up. They don't want him talking to the public. They don't want him going on the record. Okay, there's something there. I'm not saying he's an intelligence type. I'm saying that he is aware of something. If he was with a group that supposedly cuts your head off, okay, on the internet for fun, okay, and he was with them for 5 years, okay, this group for 5 years, then there is something other than what our government wants you to believe. Yeah, and look at my case. If you were to believe what the government said, oh, hey, I'm just a phony baloney who made my whole story up. That was, and of course, we won't count the massive investigation that was just completed by Senator Feinstein on the CIA, completely supporting my story. And that won't count the fact that 2 weeks ago, the Central Intelligence Agency finally came out and said, yes, we have been buying weapons of mass destruction back from Libya and Syria for several years, and we only did it because we thought U.S. soldiers had been exposed to nerve gas toxins. Okay, that was 2 weeks ago. So obviously, there's more to these stories than can come out, and that the government wants to come out. Okay, the government doesn't want anything embarrassing coming out about itself or our involvement in Afghanistan. Okay, or Iraq, especially Iraq. All right, so that's what I strongly suspect is happening here with Mr. Bergdahl, and I'd love to speak to some of his representatives. Okay, so if you can put it out on the air, Chuck, to speak to his representatives, that I would love to speak to them and find out exactly what happened and give my input into his defense. So I strongly suspect he needs a good defense.
Right. I definitely concur with you that there's always more to the story than they really want us to know. And of course it's always about the, we can do no wrong in our occupation, and interjection into all of these, adventures all across the planet, it seems like. This is the way business is done anymore. And
You know,
I think Bo Bergdahl, there's probably a lot more to that story than we're ever going to be told. And yeah, I do concur with you. I hope that he does get an adequate defense because I got a feeling there's more to that story than we're ever going to see. I mean, why this guy wasn't pretty much delivered back to us in a body bag, I don't know. But that right there says something very strange about why he went where he went, who he was actually with, et cetera, et cetera. I think you can't take any of this stuff for granted, actually, based on the amount of disinformation and lies that are put out, by the official, the officials, that are informing us about these things.
absolutely not. So, no, there's going to be much more to that story. And by the way, Bo Bergdahl should get civilian defense. Okay, he should not rely on military defense. JAG. All right, they do a good job, but they're always overwhelmed. Okay, it's a given that if the military takes a case, a court-martialed a case, all right, that means that it's going to be the people are going to be found guilty. And I can reference a very close one to my heart, and that is the kids that went to were court-martialed in Abu Ghraib prison. Okay, I knew all those kids. Okay, that went to prison, and I know that they were following our orders. Okay, Chip Fredericks, the what was her name? England, Lindy England. Okay, I mean, the whole group. Okay, they were basically condemned early on. As soon as those photos of Abu Ghraib came out, and it came out that they were in our building, okay, following our orders. Guess what? Those kids were condemned to prison time. No matter what was said, no matter what was done. Sabrina Harmon, she pointed out, and very truthfully, she didn't do anything wrong except have her picture taken with a dead man, okay, a dead man who we had killed, who my commanding officer was directly responsible for beating to death in a shower, okay. That was the Iceman Jamadi, okay, the Iceman case. Sabrina Harmon had her picture taken with him, and she went to prison. Do you think my commanding officer, Lieutenant Colonel Ryan, Lion Ryan, okay, went to prison? Oh, no, she went to prison, all right? So no, there's always much more to these stories than meets the eye. I'll challenge anybody to call in or anybody to say, oh, no, the government always tells the truth no matter what, okay? I'll challenge anyone, okay? Then the next thing I'd like to go into, okay, is this. Maybe your callers can call in and tell me what's going on. This okay. Jeb Bush, is Jeb Bush running for president?
Looks that way to me, although, the formal announcement has not actually been made yet, I think.
Well, I was just reading something in the New York Times that said, yes, he's running, and he's out in California, okay? The village idiot brother of his, okay, who managed to snag, like, it's really true what they say, anybody can be president in the United States. George Bush is the living epitome of that, okay. George W. Bush, okay, started out with a saying, remember the saying, what was it, the digital, what was it, the digital religious gathering or some damn thing like that, the tent revival, religious tent revival, but it was supposed to be broadcast digitally. And he started going on about how what was it, stem cell research was against the laws of God, for taking life and so forth. Well, that idiot, okay, and then pushed that program called The Power of the Burning Bush. Okay, get it? The power of the burning bush. All right. Well, I don't know what to say about all this because here's his brother now backing up this Indiana governor who's pushing this religious repression bill of his. Okay, it is religious repression. So here's the brother Jeb Bush doing the same thing. Well, I got a few questions for Mr. Bush. First of all, is I want to know more about Mr. Barry Seal, all right, and what happened to Mr. Barry Seal. Look that name up. Your listeners should look that name up. That'll give you a real interesting insight into how the Bushes do business. Mr. Barry Seal and Mr. Phil Marshall, they were running. They set up the original cocaine lines, importation lines for the agency. It was Phil Marshall was the pilot, and I stood in his house a year and a half ago, looking at the bloody spot. That was all that remained. Oh, and some brain matter and some skull matter too, of Phil Marshall supposedly blowing his brains out. And I looked at the bloody spots of what had been his son and daughter on the couch. Okay, and the family dog was also killed too. All right, supposedly he was I saw the picture. He was the pilot that flew Jeb Bush and Barry Seal to Latin America, where they set up the cocaine smuggling lines of communication and transport for the agency. Okay, for the agency. Now, Mr. Barry Seal, of course, I just told your listeners what happened to Mr. Phil Marshall. You can actually see a movie. It's called Unthinkable, the Phil Marshall story. YouTube won't advertise for it even now, okay, because it's so volatile. But Mr. Barry Seal was scheduled to testify against George H.W. Bush, Poppy Bush, okay, in the state Senate on cocaine importation and smuggling. And surprise, okay, he was on his way to the airport in New Orleans and was surrounded by a hit squad and killed, okay? Never caught the killers, of course, all right? He was machine gunned with Uzis, okay? And trapped in his car and killed, okay? And hence no more testimony against George H.W. Bush the next day.
Right.
So, right. And is this the same, by the way, is this the same Jeb Bush that was governor of Florida that wiped out the state workers' pension fund? What is it about these Bushes? Man, these people can make money, steal money, faster than the Great Train Robbery. I can't believe it. And
money, money, elections, you name it. Because, of course, that's the same governor of the state of Florida who disenfranchised tons of African-American voters who were, summarily removed from voting rolls right on time, for the 2000 election. Just coincidentally, his brother happened to be running. But, all that, of course, more recently a movie, and I sat down and just watched this the other day called Kill the Messenger, which, again, is the Gary Webb story, and if you don't know who that was, San Jose Mercury News reporter who actually broke the whole cocaine importation, the infamous scenes we saw with Mike Rupert standing up at that meeting in South Central Los Angeles stating that, the CIA has been smuggling cocaine into this country and is responsible for the crack epidemic on the streets. All that stuff, of course, the CIA director who decided to appear at that town meeting was dismissed about a month or two later. Hey, he made a mistake. He stuck himself out in the public. But, and all of this stuff links right back into, guess what? The whole Iran-Contra affair. This is how things were funded so that they could turn around and fund other death squads in South America. And Barry Seal is directly tied to this, but so are people like Oliver North, at that time Vice President Bush, so on and so forth. And everybody seems to forget about this. It's amazing. I'm almost surprised that they allowed that Kill the Messenger movie to have been made. Did you see it?
Yes, I did.
Okay.
And I recommend that everybody. He was actually a resident of Sacramento. Okay, where my other home is, and yes, I was aware of that case. Now the irony is he was suicided too. Okay, a lot of these poor people they get suicided. Like Michael Hastings, who broke the story on General Stanley McChrystal recently. Okay, well, I mean, what, 6 weeks after he broke the story, his car exploded. Okay, his Mercedes Benz exploded. All right, I mean, and Gary Webb, he was shot twice in the head, the classic double tap, by the way, and they deemed it a suicide,
Yeah,
another suicide.
that
Okay,
is the capper on that story, actually. Yeah, two bullets in the head, and they ruled it a suicide. Uh,
right.
you know,
And if you remember my good friend Gene Palfrey, the D.C. madam, okay, who informed me of all the weird, bizarre sexual habits of our luminaries, like Dick Turtlehead Cheney, okay, all right, all the nasty, brutal things that they like to do, in sexual terms, okay. Gene Palfrey informed me of that, and of course, next thing you know, Gene Palfrey is found hanging. Okay, women never hang themselves. Okay, Jean Palfrey supposedly hung herself in a garden shed. Okay,
at her
in a
mother's
garden
house.
shed.
At her mother's house.
Yes,
Yeah.
you got it. Yeah, you bet. So, surprise. Okay, women don't hang themselves, and another problem is Jean weighed about 120 pounds, maybe soaking wet. Well, yeah, there's a problem with that because you have to be heavy enough to either break your neck or strangle. Okay, and if you weigh that little, that light amount, okay, there's some problems there. All right. So, surprise, I did a little bit of checking and found that nobody had checked her navel for an injection site of drugs. That's what happens is in those cases, a woman is injected with drugs, keep her quiet, and then she is hanged. Okay, she is hanged like Jean was.
Right,
So
and a completely sedated body hangs differently than one that's still animated. Number one, I happen to know about this because I studied for a while. There's actually an art to being a hangman, believe it or not, and this is one of those things that you can study and understand that there is a problem the how do you put this to distribute the weight. There's actually a calculation you have to follow in order to use. I mean, a certain length of rope should be used. A design of the noose changes based on the weight of the victim, so on and so forth. And it's highly unlikely that Pelfrey there knew exactly what to do. There is a way to hang a 120-pound woman, but you've got to be pretty precise. Okay.
exactly. That's why I'm saying with all of this, and for it to happen to a friend, she was a friend, and I can hear all the snickering and all the other stuff going on. No, I met her in conjunction with an investigative journalism story, and because she knew the seedy side of Washington doesn't mean that she didn't know what she was talking about, and so and hence I got to hear all these lurid stories of all our political luminaries. All right, I mean, a lot of these stories were just too disgusting to repeat on the air. But needless to say, yes, the Gene Palfrey story completely substantiates everything that we've been hearing about in terms of the Bushes, the Cheneys, the Rumsfelds. It goes on and on. The war crimes issues,
Right.
all of this stuff. Okay,
And
it's
see,
amazing what it.
I want to make this point too because it was District Attorney Jim Garrison whose case I had studied a lot, and he was the only person to ever attempt to bring a case in the Kennedy assassination. But one of the most interesting sort of side comments that he made several times in public and also wrote was that I never understood as a prosecutor why it was that simply because a woman was a prostitute, she needed to have bad eyesight. Okay, and that was about being a witness to things. And that was his sort of, sarcastic or sardonic sort of retort to the idea that, well, your witness is a prostitute. It doesn't mean that she has bad eyesight. It doesn't mean that she didn't know exactly what she was talking about. And meanwhile, I'm not even saying that that Pelfrey was a prostitute, but just to be involved in that sort of business, again, does not make her any more or less truthful than anybody else. It's not a joke, and in fact, it really actually gives her access to, a lot of things that are more hidden to most other people. So in reality, she's got a better vantage point than most do. That's the truth about people that are involved sometimes in what we deem as, or what some people in society deem as, because I don't view it as a criminal act, prostitution, personally, but what is deemed in society as a criminal act, it doesn't necessarily make them a liar just because they're a criminal, and so on and so on. Let's keep that in mind when we talk about stuff like this. I'm saying this to the listener, not to you, but go right ahead. I just wanted to make that little commentary.
Now, the next thing that has come out in the last few days is something like this. Okay, has anybody checked on the director of the CIA? Okay, is anybody out there aware that we have a Wahhabist that's directing the CIA? Is anybody aware that it was the director of the CIA who was at the field station Jeddah who authorized and signed the visas for the 19 hijackers to come in to the U.S.? Is anybody aware of that? Okay, I am. Okay, the fellow that got fired for refusing to sign the visas, okay, at the CIA field station is well aware of this. Okay, is anybody else out there aware that we have a Wahhabist running the CIA? All right, I think this bears, it's coming to the point where I have to say, and seeing how the CIA has gone after me, okay, for doing, for obeying the law, by the way, obeying the law. I think it's time that America starts considering doing away with the Central Intelligence Agency. All right? The Central Intelligence Agency needs to be dissolved. It is a bureaucracy that has outlived its time, and it has been steadily absorbed by the Department of Defense. In fact, almost all human intelligence assets now are being trained by the Department of Defense for the agency. They don't call it the Eustis Langley Human Intelligence Training Facility for nothing in Fort Eustis, Virginia, right across the James River from Langley. I think it's about time we need to take a look at this agency. Their only claims to clear and concise victories, okay, have been Guatemala and Iran. Now, please update me, and your listeners can update me on the fact is Iran not in an adversarial mode right now with us? Okay.
Well,
and Guatemala? What?
Well, here's the thing. Iran is actually in a kind of a confusing position at this point. I don't know if you noticed this past week. I mean, it's confusing to me. Perhaps you can sort this out for me, but this tells me exactly how fictitious a lot of this stuff is. The Iranians, okay, allegedly Shiite Iranians, are on the ground assisting in the retaking of Tikrit this week. Okay, Who are they assisting? The Iraqi army, the Iraqi Air Force. So they're being supported in the air by the Iraqi military assets to take ISIS out of Tikrit. Now, wrap your mind around that for a second and tell me how confusing that is.
Well, gosh, I mean, unless I was in a coma for the last 25 years, Iran was our adversary, angry adversary, and has been supporting Hezbollah and has taken how many of our, how many embassy hostages, how many Western hostages have they tortured to death and killed? This nuclear business, okay? I mean, that's nothing to sneeze at. And also the ongoing set two with Israel, who knows, okay, what position they're in. But the point being is that that was no clear and concise victory as far as I could tell, okay, that the CIA is behind. So isn't it about time that a agency that has outlived its place and function and relevancy should be dismantled and dissolved? I think it's about time, to be quite honest.
No, and I agree with you. And all you got to do, just to give a basic history of the Iranian situation, is to take a look at Mohammad Mossadegh, who was absolutely, under Operation Ajax, was deposed, okay, essentially by CIA assets. Then a CIA asset himself was put into power in Iran, the Shah, and I hold that in quotes, the Shah of Iran, if we remember that. Of course, most famously, we had to extract him and bring him to the United States toward the end of the 70s, right? When the Ayatollah Khomeini regime, basically took hold, the actual supreme leader, not this other guy in a suit that shows up every once in a while to say something strange, but the actual Khomeini regime, which has controlled Iran ever after. Our CIA asset was deposed, and then we had the hostage crisis, like you're talking about. That was a national event, long forgotten by a lot of people at this point. But how many days did they actually hold those people? I forget now. But there was literally a countdown on the radio every single day. This is day whatever of the hostage crisis. I'm sure you recall that.
I do. I was going to college at the time.
And then if you connect that directly to the whole thing where we're making these deals for arms with Iran and the Iran Contra, we're making deals with them, and we're basically doing it with drug money. And it looks like the agency can't keep their hands clean anywhere at any point in time. And, and what is Iran but an adversary, and one that I think we've earned at this point, because look at all of the nonsense that has been done, And meanwhile, like I said, this is why I looked at this situation where Iranian Shiite forces are assisting the Iraqi army. What in the hell does that mean?
Well, Chuck, I'm looking at 19 pages of a senatorial investigation on the CIA that very clearly, 19 of 5,000 pages that state that, yes, the CIA is out of control, okay? I only read you one or two, and I saw the effect that it had even on your listeners of the issues, okay, of the CIA. The interrogations of CIA detainees were brutal and far worse than the CIA represented to policymakers and others. The conditions of confinement for CIA detainees were harsher than the CIA had represented to policymakers and others. The CIA repeatedly provided inaccurate information to the Department of Justice, impeding a proper legal analysis of the CIA's detention and interrogation program. The CIA has actively avoided or impeded congressional oversight of the program. We have got an out-of-control bureaucracy that is interested in nothing but maintaining itself and perpetuating itself. All right? They don't care who's telling them something annoying called laws, okay, or and they don't want to be held responsible by anything, as a name as a law of the land. No, as George Bush said, he wasn't going to be held responsible by a goddamn piece of paper we commonly call the Constitution. Well, the CIA doesn't either. The CIA impeded effective White House oversight and decision-making. The CIA's operation and management of the program complicated and in some cases impeded the national security mission and other executive agencies. The CIA impeded oversight by the CIA's own Office of Inspector General. The CIA was unprepared, and it began its operating detention and interrogation program more than 6 months after being granted detention authorities. The CIA's management and operation of its detention and interrogation program was deeply flawed throughout the entire program's duration, particularly in 2002 and early 2003. Oh gosh, where was I in 2003? I was working in a facility called Abu Ghraib Building 1A, CIA headquarters. God. Okay. 2 contract psychologists devised the CIA's enhanced interrogation program and were paid $84 million, by the way, for the privilege. played a central role in the operation, assessment, and management of the CIA's detention program. By 2005, the CIA had overwhelmingly outsourced operations related to the program. By the way, they call that MK Ultra. Okay, so that should ring a bell with some of your listeners. But the thing I want to get in before we run out of time here, Chuck, is this: is everybody remember Ed Snowden? What a bad old guy he was. I think he just turned 30 recently, by the way, and how he's public enemy number one. Of course, public enemy number one to the Bush administration and the Obama administration. Okay, because surprise, he has told the American people how out of control their own government is. The government views the American people as the adversaries. They have made an enemy of the American people. Ed Snowden now, this last week, has been coming out with the releases. You haven't seen it much in our media. Gee, imagine why. But it goes something like this, is that he has all the communications transmissions between our government sources as an agency and the Israelis and a little group that everybody seems to remember called Al-Qaeda. Okay? Al-Qaeda, as I've been saying, even on your show, we financed Al-Qaeda, we organized Al-Qaeda, we led Al-Qaeda, we trained Al-Qaeda, we educated Al-Qaeda, we intelligenced Al-Qaeda, we transported Al-Qaeda. Guess who Al-Qaeda is? They're ours, all right? Surprise. And there's something that stinks about the ISIS connection to Al-Qaeda also, all right? Ed Snowden is saying, okay, fine. And he is also attempting to release the satellite imagery on 9/11, showing the airplane's tracks. The flight tracks that the planes actually took. Right. Okay, it's a whole lot different than what the public was told about 9/11. That's what Ed Snowden's doing. That's what that bad old public enemy number one is attempting to do right now. All right. And also, by the way, there was some wild rumor going around last week that Ed Snowden was attempting to come back to the U.S. and submit himself for trial. Right. Yeah, I got a bridge in Brooklyn I want to sell you too. Okay. No, he did not say that. That was one of our media nonsense scams. Okay, trying to blunt the information about Al-Qaeda being released and Al-Qaeda being the U.S. governments. Okay, the U.S. governments. All right. That's what I need to get out to your listeners. Okay, that's the important thing that's going on. The torture business, the Al-Qaeda business, 9/11 business, it's not going away, folks. Okay, not by a long shot. All right, something of that magnitude that actually required the entire conspiracy and collusion of several government bodies, okay, is not going away. There's actually people that were involved deeply in it that are now suffering PTSD. Imagine trying to keep those secrets, okay? The death of 3,000 people in a morning, American, U.S. citizens, okay? And by the way, who the rescue workers, okay, were on site and could not get government benefits, okay, for all the problems that they had, trying to dig out the remains of their fellow citizens, okay, at ground zero.
Just for your note and for the listeners' note, I'm actually going to have one of those people on. Former firefighter Rudy Dent, who is retired now, will be on this show on Saturday and discuss with us what happened, because he arrived there after the towers fell and before Building 7 fell. Okay, and he was a New York City firefighter who was trying to dig his brothers out of the rubble. So we're going to do 2 hours with him on Saturday, okay, and we're going to talk about what's what, and he's going to get to speak on here uncensored, as he has not been fully uncensored on other platforms, okay? I want you guys to know that. But sorry to interrupt you about that. I want to make sure that yeah, your point is absolutely driven home. All of this stuff is interconnected. This is not a bunch of unrelated topics that you're talking about. You're absolutely right. In the 1960s, people were likening the CIA to a malignancy, and I'll tell you something, it has done nothing to improve its status, as far as I'm concerned, ever after. The absolute discarding and destruction of American citizens on so many different levels, even though it is ostensibly there as one of our great protectors in the world. It has absolutely devastated the experimentation on Americans, the drug pushing on Americans, the lying to deception, the absolute destruction of foreign individuals in order to turn sentiment against this country and against us, the people. This has all been done by that agency. And yes, I absolutely support the idea and would love to see them dismantle and destroy it once and for all. Do I think it'll happen? Well, that's yet another story, and I don't know what else you want to say about that, but I'll tell you, I can't agree with you any more than I already do.
Well, what I want to say is I want your listeners to go to my site, okay, and look at the slander, the vile slander that was put up on my site. I can't get it off, by the way. Even with a court order, I can't get it off, okay? That was put up, okay, and look who put it up. Larry Johnson of the Central Intelligence Agency and the State Department, all right? And they put that up, surprise. It wasn't so much the torture, okay, that bothered them. It was the CIA's part in the sale of weapons of mass destruction by George H.W. Bush. What position did he have with the agency? He was the director of the Central Intelligence Agency, and he had the deciding vote on whether to completely terminate the entire chemical warfare program. Okay, he had the vote twice. Okay, he could have done away with weapons of mass destruction. Oh no, he created a company called Carlyle, who, by the way, the defendants in my court case are working for now. Okay, because they helped hide those weapons of mass destruction from the American people. Okay, it was George H.W. Bush, who was director of the Central Intelligence Agency, who launched the sale of weapons of mass destruction to Saddam Hussein. And if you think I'm even joking even remotely, there are approximately 1.2 million dead Kurds and dead Iranian soldiers, okay, both from the Anfal campaign and from the Shah al-Rab waterway campaign, okay, that will testify that those weapons of mass destruction, not from Saddam Hussein's weapons of mass destruction production program, but came from America, were reconfigured in Fort Rucker, Alabama, and shipped via the Houston waterway on the USS Wabash, were dropped after 5 hours after Dick Cheney shook the hand of Saddam Hussein to seal the deal. They were dropped on the Kurds, and the second batch that was delivered was dropped on the Iranian soldiers in the Shah al-Rab waterway about 5 hours after Donald Rumsfeld shook the hand of Saddam Hussein. All right.
Listen, we got less than a minute left, and all of this is, as I said before, absolutely interconnected, and this is the real full story. Not where we started out with the supermarket tabloids, but the reality of the world. And as I've said many times, I absolutely back your story, and know that you're telling me the truth about a great many things. I've been able to verify some of it, and as I said, that which I cannot verify or things that, you physically experienced yourself. And therefore, I have to take your word because you were there, you did see these things, you are aware, and you're aware of a great many more things that can be revealed over time. And I want to thank you for joining me tonight and thank everybody who decided to take a listen to the Ochelli Effect here on UCY.TV radio. Everybody, keep that in mind. The CIA, the malignancy has not gone away. And I think it's about time to cut the cancer out.
Thank you, Chuck.
You're welcome, sir. And thank you so much for going through this so many different times, all these different stories and your unique insights. I I am absolutely privileged to have you on this show, and I do appreciate you.